Chapter 7, Chapter 8. Chapter 8. As the days here slip by, whilst the transit yet lies too distant for him to quite believe in, Dixon, assailed without mercy by his sensorium, almost in a swoon, finds himself, on nights of cloud, less and less able to forego emerging at dusk, cloaked against the Artesian wind, and making directly for the prohibited parts of town. Somewhere a tune in the musical mode styled by the East Indians pelog, which they term appropriate to evening, bells quietly with him as he goes, keeping the rhythm of his stride, and he begins to whistle briskly along. After months of being told by masters-at-arms that he might not whistle aboard ship, any resumption of the vice comes as a freedom almost torpedic, particularly here, with lawless bustle at every hand, black slaves carrying gamecocks, looking for a spot contest, bandietin exiled from Batavia with their retinues of pygmies, women in veils, drosters down on business, sailors to whom every port of calls but another imitation of whopping, and along the way, at each dimmed crossing, Cape Malays waiting with goods to sell, all of whom have soon come to know Dixon. Here, Tuan, best dagger, cleaned, graded, ready for your flame. Real Dutch gin, bottles with the original seals, yes, intact as virgins. Latest ketchup, arrived express from Indochina, see, pineapple, pumplenose, tamarind, 100 flavours, 1,000 blends. Invisible through the long Dutch workday, life in the Cape night now begins to unwrap everywhere. Dixon smells the broiling food, the spices, the livestock, the night-blooming vines, the ocean voracious and immense. He is acquiring a nasal map of the town, learning in monitory whiffs to smell the watch, pipes, sheep fat suppers, pre-watch gin, and to take evasive action. Learning to lurk, become part of the night, close enough to slave-born lanterns passing by to feel their heat as easily as he may scent the burghers' wives through the curtains of their sedan chairs. The St. Helena coffee, English soap, French dampness. In the distance, the nightly curfew cannon barks, announcing Dixon's transition to the state of outlaw. He feels like a predatory animal, as if this town were ancient to him, his hunting ground, his fell so misremembered in nearly all details, save where lie the boundaries he does not plan to cross. Though how can there be any room for excess in this gossip-ridden town, crowded up against the mountains that wall it from the virid vast leagues of bushman's land beyond? as behind these carved doors and Gothical gates, in the far penumbra of sperm tapers, in loft and voorhuis, in entryways scoured by dusk and blown sand. These Dutch carry on as if judgment be near as the towering seas and nothing matter any more, especially not good behaviour, because there's no more time, the bets are in. Every individual fate decided, all cries taken by the great winds, and 'tis done. Temporally as geographically, the end of the world. The unrelenting vapour of debauchery here would not merely tempt a saint, heavens, 'twould tempt an astronomer. Yet 'tis difficult, if not impossible, for these astronomers to get down to a chat upon the topic of desire. Given Dixon's inability to deny or divert the gusts that sweep him, and Mason's frequent failure in his melancholy even to recognise desire, let alone to act upon it, though it run up calling, "Ahoy, Charlie!" How could you begin to understand? Mason sighs. You've no concept of temptation. You came ashore here looking for occasions to transgress. Some of us have more backbone, I suppose. A bodily part too often undistinguished, Dixon replies, from a ramrod up the arse. Jet slides by in the narrow hallway. Don't forget tonight, Charles, she sings. I'll remember, mutters Mason, adjusting his wig. Dixon beams after her, then back at Mason. Engaging youngster? She is a fine young woman, Dixon, and I shan't hear a word more. Tell me, blinks Dixon. What'd I say? But Mason has already clambered away up the stairs. Passing through the hallway a bit later, Dixon observes Mason now in deep conversation with Greet, the two of them nervous as cats. Mutton again this evening, I'm told, Dixon cries in cheery salute. The girl shrieks and runs off into the kitchen. Mason snarls. Time hanging heavy, is that it? What can I do to help? Just name it. Why, aye, perhaps when the ladies have retired. Thus bickering, they pass into the dining room. After the Cape custom, the Dutchman has locked his front door for the evening meal, which he now regards smouldering, less predictable than an Italian volcano. I see you have discovered another Cape delicacy, Mr. Dixon. Joanna, in an effort to get into any verbal exchange with Mason, whilst her husband is in the room. Our Malays call it ketchup. Girls, don't even want you looking at it. Filthy Asian stuff, Cornelius commands through clouds of aromatic pipe smoke. Even, puff, if something has to be done, puff, to cover up the taste of this food. Another volcanical emission, whilst he grimly attacks his slice of the evening's mutton in tail fat. Over the course of its late owner's life, the tail has grown not merely larger and more fatty, but also, having absorbed years of ovine flatulence ever blowing by, to exhibit a distinct taste, perhaps prized by cognoscetti somewhere, though where cannot readily be imagined. Dixon, meanwhile, is struggling with the very Chinese concoction, or rather with its slender bottle, out of whose long neck he finds he has trouble getting the stuff to flow. "Strike her upon the bottom," whispers Els, "and perhaps she will behave." Dixon does a quick triple take among the faces of the women, a jocularity poised upon his tongue, but peering out warily, not quite trusting the open. He notes at the far corner of his visual field Mason attempting to hide behind, perhaps even beneath, the food on his plate. Cornelius, president inside his blue tobacco fumulus, seems unaware of the tangle of purposes in the room. Greet is playing vigorously with locks of her hair, trying to remember what her sisters above and below think she does and doesn't know at this point in the saga, as against what her mother believes. What Mason may be thinking is of course unimportant to any of them. At last, the relentless supper done, the Vrooms, as is their custom, retire out front to the stoop, Joanna and the girls swiftly choosing seats to windward of Cornelius and his watchfire, leaving the astronomers to light what pipes they may in self-defence. There is something irresistibly perverse, as the Reverend then noted, about a young white woman sitting upon a stoop in the evening among a steady coming and going of black servants, meant in the theatre of the Japanese, as in the theatre of the Japanese, to be read as invisible, whilst she poses all ashine, she and her friends. According to which steps they sit upon, and which are then claimed by the feet of young sparks who might wish to linger, the possible viewing angles for both parties are more or less multiplied, each combination of steps having its own elaborate codes for what is allowed and what transgresses, from eye play to the readjustment of skirts and underskirts, and the length of time 'tis considered proper to gaze. Some belles like to boss their male slaves about in front of the young men, whilst others wish to be caught gazing after girl slaves with unconcealed envy. Over the range of their desires they are shameless, these Dutch girls of all ages, for they are the girls of the end of the world. And the only reason for anyone to endure church all day Sunday is to be reminded of the boundaries there to be overstepped. The more aware of their sins as they commit them, the more pleased be these Cape folk, more so than Englishmen, who tend to perish from the levels of remorse, attending any offence graver than a leer. Slowly, gravely, the yonkers dance up and down the steps in the evening. Their talk is of rooftops, archways, sheds and warehouses, any place secure from traffic long enough for a skirt to be lifted or breeches unbuckled. Johanna keeps looking over at Mason as if offering to translate. A young gallant arrives bearing a diminutive three-stringed lute and dropping to one knee before Jet, though she has delegated the sighing to her sisters, sings his own original paean to Cape womanhood. O Cape girl, in the ocean wind, fairer than the full moon, secret as a sin. You're a light lass, so the lads all say, sitting on your stoop, hoping love will pass today. You keep your slaves about, as don't we all, yet no one is brave, and even a slave may fall in love with Cape girl. When the southeasters blow, through my dreams I know, to your arms I'll go. Cape Girl, don't say no. And self-accompanied whim, what is that tiny object in your lap that you've been wanging your triads upon there, and so rhythmically too? Found this down at that market near the gallows. 'Tis a Fiji Islander's guitar, first introduced there 200 years ago by Portuguese Jesuits, according to the Malay that sold me it. I see the Jesuit part clearly enough, Greet remarks. So long as you don't grasp it, murmurs Els. 'Tis an open enough game, with a level of calculation among these daughters of the low country, no less forgiving than the sort of thing that may be heard, any slack time, among the girls in the company brothel at the slave lodge. Two distinct worlds, the company maintaining their separation, setting prices, seeking as ever total control over the sex industry in Cape Town. Yet there do remain a few independents, brave girls and boys who are young enough to enjoy the danger of going up against the company. Sylphs of mixed race, mixed gender, who know how to vanish into the foothills and the droster network, even finding safety beyond in the land of the Hottentots. Yet 'tis difficult to leave the life in town, to give up that sudden elation, when the ships appear around the headlands, Spanish dollars everywhere in golden infestation, every woman in town, from the stoniest white church pillar to the giddiest black belle from the hinterland, at once coming alert, and even sometimes a jangle. The taverns are jumping, sailors bring their pipes and fiddles ashore, dugger smoke begins to scent the air, voices lift, music pulses, the nights bloom like jasmine. 'Tis then Mason and Dixon are most likely to be out rambling among all the spices armies used to kill for. Up in the Malay Quarter, a protruded tongue of little streets askew to the Dutch grid, reaching to the base of Table Mountain. The abrupt evening descends, the charcoal fires come glowing one by one to life, dotting the hillside. Night slowly fills with cooking aromas, shrimp paste, tamarinds, coriander and cumin, hot chilies, fish sauces and fennel and fenugreek, ginger and lenkua. Windows and doorways open to lives finite but overwhelming, households gathering against the certain night. Greet Vroom slips away with Ostra to follow the astronomers. They visit different kitchens and eat, she reports back to her sisters, nodding her head, a little out of breath. They wander about, eating and talking. Every now and then they'll step into one of those seamen's taverns. What do they eat? Everything. Half of it is food you wouldn't dream of. Out in the dark where the Malays all feast, spices and vegetable treats from the east, peppers as hot as the hearthsides of hell, things that Papa has neglected to tell, curried wild peacock and springbok ragout, Bilimpy pinkles, ragout, Bilimpy pickles and tamarinds too, bobotti, fricadelle, fried porcupine, glasses are brimming with Constantia wine, singing, pass me that plate, hand me that bowl, let's have that bottle, toss me a roll, scoffing and swilling out under the sky, leaving the stars to go silently by. Greet, uncombed, sentimental greet, jet gushes. It occurs to no one that what has driven the astronomers up the slopes of Table Mountain may be, at last, the table vroom. The pipe smoke, the sheep fat, the strange dinnerware, everything, dishes, spoons, yes, even twinkling through the mutton broth at the bottom of one's spoon, are these, well, stories, battles, religious events, personages with rapt fizzes standing about in rays from above, pointing aloft at who knows what, violent scenes of martyrdom from the religious wars of the previous century, obscure moral instructions written in all but unreadable lettering, and in Dutch withal, framing the potatoes on one's plate, or encircling some caudal stafata being passed from eater to eater, and rotated as it goes, so that each gets to view a separate episode of some forever obscure doctrinal dispute. Soon enough, Mason and Dixon are desperate. Pretending astronomical chores up at the observatory, bowls and cutlery concealed in their cloaks, they steal away, thinking of oceanic fish, African game, hot peppers, spices of the East. I believe in vibrations, declares Mason. I believe that vibrations from that horrid family get into their food, which is difficult enough to enjoy to begin with. And I'd rather be out here. Why, aye. As far projected into the sea, each will confide, as land may go, out blessedly alone upon the furthest point, nothing beyond but the uninterrupted planetary seas of the 40s, the West Wind Express, and the regions of ice, and the mystery at the exact other pole, the night fog creeping like quicksilver, all but surrounded by a waste where the seas might grow higher than either astronomer can imagine without fear, set up and waiting for a southern star, lumina of a shapely constellation unnamed, forever below and any British horizon to culminate. They have come upon a queue forming up a dark street and decide to join it. Dixon in his red coat, boots with 3-inch heels and mysteriously cockaded hat. Mason, after an hour before his traveller's mirror, having assumed rather a darkened, volish neutrality. As they move slowly toward the makeshift kitchen tent, more and more of its candlelit interior may be seen. A man in a sarong cooks as though possessed, running about with a crease to gaze too long at whose bright wavy edge might put a man's thumbs a prickle, as his mind in a bind. Poking embers precisely into huge gusts of flame, stirring the contents of various pots, peeling garlic, deveining and butterflying shrimps, slicing vegetables, boning and filleting fish, performing perhaps a dozen such tasks, more or less simultaneously with this single implement, whilst beds of embers glow, and from iron pans rise huge clouds of smoke and steam, so fragrant that breathing them is like eating the first plateful of a large meal. And his wife hands the food out the window and collects the money, and older children carry and prepare whilst younger ones tend the babies in the dark, watching the progress of the crees which they have seen fly, heard sing, and in the presence of a pure well felt a tremble, there being an odd number of waves to its blade, signifying alliance with the correct forces. Amazing! Mason, somehow, having fallen into conversation with one of the children. In my country, near my home, since the mills came, our pure wells have been well hidden, and we must now ask dowsers, who use long hazel wands in much the same way to find them. Have the Dutch conquered your land too? Oh dear me, no, Mason primed to chuckle in condescension, till Dixon, infernally abeam, says, William of Orange? What about him? They wouldn't style that a conquest? Captain Jerry, good evening. The Satay Deluxe as usual? Looks bonny, Rachman. What are those yellow bits there? Mangoes. Still on the green side tonight. But tomorrow's the day. Accordingly, next morning at the first risen gull's cry, Mason, the mangoes are in. Bring me back a likely one, Mason mutters, and perhaps I shan't kill you. Yet out of something like duty owed his senses, he finds himself shambling down to the market, yawning in the sun, there to behold mountains of the fruit, apparently all come to ripeness at the same moment, causing a panic. For all must then be picked in a short time from the groves up country and rushed directly to town, to lie in these towering heaps, weighted, to be lifted and appraised, as they find the Reverend Wickes Cherrycoke doing when they arrive. Well met, gentlemen, what a morning! One feels as Adam felt, even better, as Eve. I shall kill him now, Mason declares. Get the old nozzle down upon this one, Mason, a beauty, is it not? The aroma captures Mason's attention. Aye, thou'd better eat that one now, thy nose has been all over it. Why don't I throw it at you instead? They are soon retired to a nearby stoop, where they sit eating mangoes. Neighbouring stoops are similarly occupied. Thought you'd sailed, Dixon says. The Seahorse proceeds without me. East of the Cape, Captain Grant was pleased to inform me men of Christ are not desired, though why he refused to say, even when I suggested that if clergy be banned, then what is contemplated out there must be too terrible to speak of in any way but secretly. I, personally, am looking for that bastard St. Foo, Captain Grant declared. My Seahorse is a damned snappy little package, and I suppose I've grown to love her, for her honour has become important to me. Shall I be safer in Cape Town? Inquired the Reverend. Safe enough. You shouldn't have to wait long to wait. India men come through all the time, though they are most inflexibly anti-clerical folk. Their cargo spaces are purposely built a ton short to avoid the law that requires a chaplain on board, so you'd do better to represent yourself in some other line of work. Thou could pretend to be an astronomer, Dixon says. All thou need to know, I can teach thee in 5 minutes. Surveying won't take even that long, snaps Mason. Piss runneth downhill, and payday is Saturday. Now you're a qualified fence runner. The Reverend holds aloft a mango as if 'twere a host. Had I gone, I should have missed this. Regard how the fruit takes its shape, and feel from this great seed case within, which the Spanish call el hueso, the bone. This mango handles like flesh. To peel it is to flay it. To bite into it is to eat uncooked flesh, though I can imagine as well uncomfortable religious questions arising. Mason, who has been shocked by impieties far more venial, might have shared his moral displeasure with a topic not food, allowing him promptly to advert to his own Iliad of dietary misfortune here among the Dutch. Their emphasis upon roots, the eternal boiling, the absence of even salt, we have already reviewed. 'Tis the sheep. Heaven forfend we should ever find a moment without sheep in it. Sheep, where I come from, are more important than all but a few humans. A boy is as likely to learn to skate upon a sharing floor as upon the ice. The smell, at some times of year sensible for miles, of sheep and wool fat, and that queasy needor of lambs baking in ovens meant for bread, the very nasal patina that met me here, upon entering my first Dutch house, of mutton fat, vaporized and recondensed again and again, working its way insidiously over the years of cooking into all walls, furniture, draperies, within a certain radius of that kitchen. Ah! How foolishly did I believe I'd escaped these perfumes of Gloucestershire. Nay, at that Dutchman's table I am returned to them as to a kind of hell. The young clergyman nods in apparent sympathy. Then eating Malay food seems a cheap enough deliverance, bearing in mind that the cuisine of a people whose recreations include running amok is necessarily magical in purpose and effect, and no one is altogether exempt. Oh, that was Cherry Coke. Later that night, writing in his journal, adding, Lamb of God, Eucharist of bread, what Mr. Mason could not bear were the very odours of blood sacrifice and transubstantiation, the constant element in all being the oven, the altar, where before his father presided. A few pages later, he admits, Of course 'twas none of my affair, yet such was the unease of those days as I waited for a ship to convey me further east, that I sought distraction in the study of other lives, usually without their principals knowing of it. So we found ourselves, for the moment, as some might say, beached just here, upon the brink of all the Indies, before the unfolding, fearful and inexhaustible, of the East.